Welcome to the video tutorial on PageGate's SNPP server module. Before we begin, the SNPP server module requires PageGate's Getasci interface to function. For licensing information, please contact our sales department at sales@notepage.com or by phone at 781-829-0500, extension 1. The first step is to find the location of the PageGate program and data directories. To do so, open the PageGate admin. Then go to Program, Settings. Here on the right, make a note of the program directory as well as the root of your general data folders. Now that we have those paths, we'll need to create a directory for the SNPP server's files. Typically speaking, we recommend that you create this directory on the PageGate server itself, but this isn't a requirement. You can host this process on another system and share the SNPP server's folder on the network to grant the PageGate server access to it. In this tutorial, we'll be going over the local configuration, so open a file browser and browse into the PageGate data directory. Next, create a folder. This folder can be named anything you like, but I recommend using the name SNPP just to keep things simple. Now we want to browse into the PageGate program directory. Once there, find snpp.ini, snppserver.exe, and Pininfo Txt. These three files are the control files for the SNPP server. You'll want to select them, then copy them. Then browse back into the SNPP folder that you created, and paste the files here. Next, open snpp.ini in your preferred text editor. The snpp.ini is the basic configuration file for the SNPP server and controls the server's basic functions and behaviors. The port field designates what port your SNPP server will listen to. By default, this is the standard SNPP port 444. The max message length value determines how long messages received by the SNPP server can be. By default, this is 240 characters. This means that the SNPP server will only accept up to 240 characters in a single message, and messages longer than 240 characters need to be split. Output folder determines where the SNPP server will output received messages. This can be any folder local to the SNPP server, but I recommend using the SNPP directory itself as the output folder. In this instance, we would use c:\pagegatedata/SNPP as the output folder. Log folder determines where the SNPP server will write its log. This can be any folder local to the SNPP server, but I recommend using the PageGate logging folder. In this instance, we would use c:\pagegatedata/logs. Max log length determines how large the SNPP server's log is allowed to be. By default, this is 100,000 bytes or 100 kilobytes. Detailed log determines whether the SNPP server's log should be in summary mode or should record the detailed transaction information. We definitely recommend setting detailed log to true. Silent rejections determines whether or not the SNPP server should notify the sender of a bad ID/pin. If this is enabled and something tries to send to an ID that doesn't exist, they will receive a hard rejection error indicating so. If this is disabled and something tries to send to an ID that doesn't exist, they will not be notified that the message was rejected. Sender allows you to hard-code the sender value for all accepted messages. Extract sender configures the SNPP server to look for sender's information at the beginning of a message and expects a colon as a dividing character. Login allows you to configure a password required to access your SNPP server. If this field has a value, users must authenticate with the logi, also known as login command, and provide the information specified in this field. Max connections determines the maximum number of simultaneous inbound connections the SNPP server is allowed to handle at once. The upper limit of this value is controlled by the hardware that you're running the program on. Better hardware will be able to support more simultaneous connections than older hardware. And last, we have a field that doesn't appear in the INI file by default, the registration line. To register the SNPP server module, you'll need to add this line to the bottom of the file. Registration with a capital R equals your registration key number. Be sure to include the dashes as they are required. Once you've finished setting the SNPP server settings, save and close the INI file. Next, open Pininfo Txt. This file tells the SNPP server what range of values can be passed to the server. The format of entries defined in this file are as follows. You start with the starting ID, end with the ending ID, and then determine the recipient type. For example, if the IDs passed need to correspond to specific recipient and group names in PageGate, you would use the text PG_recipient for a declared rule. If you would like an ID passed through PageGate in an ad hoc setup, use the name of a recipient in PageGate whose type is set to ad hoc. It's important to note that alphanumeric characters are allowed. For example, if we want the program to accept any value from A001 to Z999, you would use A001 as your starting range, Z999 as the ending range, and PG_recipient to indicate that these IDs should correspond to names of recipients and groups in the PageGate admin. It's also important to note that you can specify an asterisk as a starting and ending range to indicate that the program should accept all IDs. For example, you could use asterisk as the starting range and asterisk as the ending range, and that would tell the program that all ID values are allowable. Once you've configured the ranges of IDs that the SNPP server should accept, save and close the Pininfo file. Now we'll need to determine if we want the SNPP server to run as an application or Windows service. To run it as an application, simply double-click on the SNPP server executable to run the program. However, we definitely recommend running the SNPP server as a Windows service. Applications are logon dependent, which means that a user must be logged into the desktop before an application can run. Windows services, on the other hand, are not logon dependent, which means that you could reboot the system and not log into the desktop, and the SNPP server will still run and accept messages in the background. To run the SNPP server as a service, run a command prompt in Windows with elevated permissions. To do so, go to your Start menu and search for the word Command. When Command Prompt comes up, right-click on it and select Run as Administrator. Change directory into the SNPP server program directory. Once here, type SNPP server /reinstall, then hit Enter. Now open the Windows Services list. Find the PageGate SNPP server service, right-click on it, and select Start. The final step is to configure PageGate's Getasci interface to watch for output from the SNPP server. To do that, open the PageGate admin. Next, go to Interfaces, Getasci, Settings. If you do not currently have a polling directory specified, set this to the SNPP server's output folder. By default, c:\pagegatedata\SNPP. Check Enabled, click Apply, then tell it yes, you do want this to be enabled. If you do already have a polling directory specified, you'll want to go instead to the Interfaces, Getasci, Settings, Advanced Polling, Files. Here in the Files table, click Add to add a new entry. Set the recipient to star, set from to SNPP. Set files to star.asc. Set the path to the SNPP server's output folder. By default, c:\pagegatedata\SNPP. Set the file type to standard. Click Apply, then click Apply again, and you've finished the configuration. This concludes the video tutorial on how to configure PageGate's SNPP server. For more information, including an overview of the Getasci interface, please visit our website, www.notepage.net.